Welcome to this release event for You Matter, an illustrated guide for young people beyond mandatory reporting. I'm excited to share this new publication in zine, and we'll introduce all the people who pulled it together in a minute. I'm putting into the chat a link to the zine for the people who would like to access it. My name is Miriam Kaba. I use she, her pronouns. I am zooming in from Lenape land in New York City. I'm the founder and director of Project NIA and also co-founder of Interrupting Criminalization. And I welcome you on behalf of both groups this afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. We always begin with a digital land acknowledgement adapted from Adrian Wong. And I will put into the chat a link, just that information from that digital land acknowledgement, and I will also read it out so everybody can hear it if you can or experience it. Since our activities are shared digitally to the internet, let's take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within the technology, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many indigenous communities. The technologies that are central to almost everything we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect indigenous peoples worldwide. I invite you to join in acknowledging all of this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time, and for each of us to consider our roles in repair, restitution, decolonization, and co-strugglership. This session is part of our ongoing series titled Building Your Abolitionist Toolbox. Our goal in this series is to explore different resources that help us build daily practices to move us closer to a world free of imprisonment, policing, and surveillance. Together, we are learning how we can use abolitionist organizing tools and values in our relationships, our homes, our schools, our organizations, and our communities. We are considering how we can deepen discussions about justice, harm, and healing, and we're diving into active ways that we can work towards an abolitionist future that includes everyone. You can find the resources from all of the previous sessions at the Abolitionist Tools website, which I will put into the chat as well. Oh, thank you, Eva. So we have an incredible team with us today because everything worthwhile is done with others. Eva of Interrupting Criminalization is holding down tech today. You can chat her if you have any tech issues. We have ASL interpretation and live closed captioning. You can access live captioning by clicking on CC at the bottom of your screen. There'll be notes from these, graphic notes, and we can thank Laura Chow-Reeve of Radical Roadmaps, who is our regular graphic note taker. But funnily and excitingly today, Laura was part of the team that created the wonderful zine being shared here today. So you won't just see either Laura's face or black box, or not see Laura at all, because Laura's taking notes from, the video or the audio. But you'll actually hear from Laura today and talk to them about what they're up to. They'll talk to you about what they've been up to. So about the chat, participants will be able to chat. If you have questions or comments, we invite you to drop them into the chat. We will have a few minutes at the end also for questions in this particular session, so you'll be able to engage that way. Our next session in the series will be October 26th, and we are actually going to be talking, it's going to be a criminalization 101 session for information workers. So people who are library workers or in other ways, information workers will be invited to join us, and we'll have a small new resource that we'll share for folks for that. So let's get centered in our values for this event. I'm going to share some words that I appreciate that we always share at these sessions that were adapted from Free Minds, Free People. We believe that at the center of liberation is radical love for each other and for ourselves. That love pushes us to try to create a better world. Because of that, we are working to minimize the amount of harm that occurs in our spaces. White supremacy, misogyny, ableism, classism, homophobia, and transphobia exist everywhere, even in radical spaces. They are some of the threads out of which normative society is woven, and it is hard to untangle them. So if you're called out today, particularly in the chat, in some way for perpetuating any of these, please understand that it is not because you are unimportant or that we wish to exclude you. Instead, we're trying to demonstrate compassion and care and do the least amount of harm towards people in our communities, particularly those with marginalized identities. We recognize that we are all entrenched in these systems of oppression and that we all have work to do. We invite everyone to be accountable for their participation within these systems of oppression. We ask everyone to challenge themselves and to fight against it in these spaces. If you enact displays of power and oppression, we will talk to you. We will invite you to educate yourself and to relearn how to interact with others in the space without enacting harm. If you cannot or are unwilling to address it, we will ask you to leave. We need both love and rage in every part of our lives to carry on dismantling oppression. Both can be a part of radical resistance to the destructive world in which we live today, if we put in the effort to truly learn from and care about each other. We seek to forge stronger bonds and create a community that we can rely on rather than systems of violence. So being accountable to each other for our behavior is a really good way to start. So tonight, the new zine, You Matter, an illustrated guide for young people beyond mandatory reporting, was developed to support young people, especially those under the age of 18, to answer the question, when something hard happens, who can I reach out to for help? It is brought to you by the Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral project, with support from Just Beginnings Collaborative and the Youth Interns at the Good Foot Arts Collective. This is actually weirdly a kind of full circle moment for Building Your Abolitionist Toolbox, because Shannon Perez-Darby is here tonight. And Shannon was actually the first person who launched our first session of Building Your Abolitionist Toolbox in September of 2020. So it's been 3 years, and exactly 3 years. And we have Shannon back tonight. So I'm really excited about that. Shannon is joined by Laura Chow-Reeve, who I mentioned earlier has been our graphic note taker all this time. And then Sean Koyano, who is also here, who will be presenting today. So without further ado, I will cede the space to Shannon, to Laura, and to Sean. Welcome.
Thank you so much. That is so beautiful. I will start sharing my screen and then actually hand it over to Laura right away to continue our grounding.
Hi, hello everyone. It's very weird to be in front of this screen today, but I'm really excited. And I didn't realize that it was exactly 3 years since the first session. So that's amazing. So the first thing we wanted to do is just to do a little grounding. This is actually an activity in the zine. And like all groundings, you know, they're not for everyone. So if this doesn't feel like it for you tonight, that's totally okay. You can do something else. You can just tune out for a second. But I invite you, if you do have some paper next to you, you can draw a little blob human form like the one you see on the screen. It doesn't have to be have the organs and the body parts, but maybe just the shape. And I am going to invite you once you have that, and also if you don't want to draw, you just like want to be present, I want you to just think about, how do conversations about mandated reporting make you feel? Where do you feel them on your body? And you can draw or color or touch the parts of your body where you feel them. And just take a few moments to do that, just to notice, are my shoulders feeling tense? Do I maybe like feel something in my temples? Is my stomach feeling a little butterfly or fluttery? You could draw a butterfly over your stomach if that's the case. So just take a few moments to ground in that feeling, because these conversations can be really scary. In the same way that they can be, maybe we're also really excited because we've been really wanting to have these conversations with other people and haven't maybe had the space to do that. So just a few more moments of either just feeling your body or drawing on paper next to you. And once we're doing that, you can just sit with that for a second or two, and I'll pass it to Shannon.
Thank
Oh,
you.
but
Of course.
sorry. But before I do, this activity was actually inspired by my friend Abby, who's also an amazing graphic recorder, who created the watercolor emotion wheel, which you also can see on the screen. So I invite you to look at a lot of free resources on like the emotion wheel that they offer on their website, which thank you, Eva, for putting that below.
Thank you so much, Laura. So I'm going to do, as we had our groundings and our introductions, just a couple of reminders, mostly for our team, around access and around this project. A reminder to myself and to all of the folks that are speaking and sharing to slow down our pace, to make sure that what we are sharing is accessible, is available to folks. So I am going to continue with that commitment, and it is always helpful to be reminded of. The other piece is we are about to break into the zine and all the pieces, but we did want to share that thanks to Laura and Sean, there's a screen reader version of the zine. Eva just put the link to that in the chat, and it is available on the Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral website. So feel free to access the screen reader version as you need. So a little bit about how this project came to be, about who we are. The Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral project works to share survivor stories about the impact of mandatory reporting, educate communities on harm reduction practices, and change the conditions that lead to violence and abuse. Almost all of the core members of the Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral project are here tonight. So Sean and I are both core members presenting, but I saw Wesley and Anjali and Carrie, I don't know if Norma's here, who are also members of our core project. So I just wanted to give a shout out that so many of the folks over the last 4 years, is that how time works, who've been working on this project, often in lots of less visible ways, are all with us. So I wanted to give a shout out to this amazing team of folks. So the team that brought this zine together, Laura, myself, and Sean, just a little bit about who we are and how we came to be together to do what is absolutely been one of my favorite things I've gotten to work on all year. Regularly, when I'm talking to my friends, I'm like, oh, this zine is the thing that brings me joy. And it brings me joy because I love working with Laura and Sean. I love thinking about creative, practical tools that center young people. And I love that we spend the first 20 minutes of any time we meet with each other talking about pop culture. And so um, I didn't ask Laura, but we talk, Laura has helped me guide me through the Sister Wives fandom, which I really appreciate. Every time I'm like, all right, what's the thing? What do I need to know? And so it is just deeply joyful to work together. Also some gratitude. We want to thank, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in a moment, the Goodfoot Arts Collective. I just cannot say enough amazing things about the work they did that really helped make this possible. So I'll talk more about that in specifics, and we'll share some links to their work, but just our deepest gratitude to everyone there, including their youth interns who helped us make this possible. Deep gratitude to Just Beginnings Collaborative, who helped to support our time, our energy, the resource to make this zine possible, to Project Nia and everyone else here for helping to debut it and to helping to bring this opportunity together. And then these are some names of specific folks who lent their work, lent their time, lent their energy in some specific way to help make the project happen. So the zine. I know in the beginning, the link to the zine got put in, but we'll probably put it in one more time for anyone who's late. We will take through a couple of the pieces of the zine, but I want to just sort of ground in its original vision. So at the Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral project, we have a number of different strategies we use with a shared understanding of the harms of criminalization, of the harms of mandatory reporting, of the need to abolish mandatory reporting and family policing. And we do a lot of different strategies to organize folks, to make sure folks have what they need, and then thinking about changing the larger conditions. And that is a very clear commitment. And one of the things that keeps coming up over and over again is we know, and I'll share more why in a moment, why we know, but we know that mandatory reporting impacts young people's ability to get the support they need. It functionally silences young people. We teach young people to not share with the adults in their lives what's going on for them, for fear of having to report, for fear of having their information shared with the state, with Child Protective Services and others. And one of the things that collective impact of mandatory reporting is doing is it's making young people who experience violence and harm less safe. And so while we are working to abolish family policing and mandatory reporting, it became really clear that we needed more tools for young people to understand and be well informed about mandatory reporting, about the impact on their lives, so that they could make choices about how to reach out for help, about how to talk about what was going on in their lives, about who to reach out to, given the realities of mandatory reporting. And even if there was no person, there was no adult or peer who you felt like you could reach out to, how could we help resource and support young people to get clear about, what information their bodies were telling them, how to think about what they need. And that is the vision for this zine. So the vision for the zine is that it can be, a workshop in a zine. You could take it and if you were a person who was supporting young people or in a youth group or a teacher or someone who was supporting young people in some organized way, you could print out the zine and absolutely do work in group with folks. And it's designed that someone could download it themselves. Someone could, pick up a copy and do self-reflection work. And we do have information in the beginning to help really think about, and we did a lot of thinking about, we're asking young people to reflect, to draw, to use art, to use music, to say, hey, what's going on? and to make sure that anytime you're asking people questions about themselves and you're asking them to write it down, that can have a consequence, or other people can read what they wrote. So we did a lot of thought into thinking about how do we make sure young people have choices and are well informed and can get the support they need. So that's the core of the zine. One of my hopes for this zine is that we've worked really hard to make it, to put lots of intention into it, and then it is freely available. So it's on the Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral website. It's on the Just Beginnings Collaborative website. There's a digital version, so one you could just look at online. And then there's also a version you could print out and make, oh, I have some here, make in-person copies of the zine to pass out. And please share it far and wide, recreate it, send it out. It is meant to be a tool that is live in the world. We're not, I don't, this is maybe slightly too crass. I don't want to manage it. I want it to be birthed into the world, and please use it. Please use it. Please recreate it. Please envision it how it works best for you. So that's a little bit about our vision. So this is just an example of some of the pages to really help young people think about, how to reflect on what is right for them. So this is not a time we are going to do a deep dive into all the nuances of mandatory reporting. On the Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral website, we have a lot of freely available trainings and webinars. If you really want to understand what's the deal with mandatory reporting, why is it harmful, why is it not neutral, what are strategies that communities can be using instead of reporting, we have a number of different resources available on the Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral website. So we encourage folks to look at that. But I do want to just say a couple of things. So, the definition that we use of mandatory reporting is that it is a combination of policies, practices, and state-based laws that require certain people to report specific harms to government agencies, such as Child Protective Services, the Department of Children and Family, Adult Protective Services, and/or the police. And since the invention of mandatory reporting as a system, roughly in the 1960s is the first bit we get national data, we've seen that the increase of reports that are made into the mandatory reporting systems in each state has increased 2,766% over the years. And we know that the majority of reports that are made into those systems are unsubstantiated. So, according to the government's own data, 80 to 90% of reports that are being made either are not followed up on, or if they are investigated, there's not action that is taken by the state beyond the investigation. We also know that mandatory reporting and family policing is a highly racialized question that's particularly crushing Black and Indigenous communities. We know that the prevalence of percentage of lifetime prevalence of Child Protective Service investigations by race and ethnicity, that 53% of Black folks will have experienced an investigation, that we know that's 24% for Native folks. We have shared in many places, but there is a report, There's No One I Can Trust, the impacts of mandatory reporting on the help-seeking and well-being of domestic violence survivors. And Carrie Lippy is a co-author on that report and a member of our core group, and also here with us tonight. So shout out to Dr. Lippy. And some of the information in this report is how we started to name ourselves Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral. So some of the things that this survey learned, so it was a survey that was administered to folks who were waiting to talk to an advocate as part of the National Domestic Violence Hotline. So they have a loveisrespect.org chat portion, and there's often a wait to speak to an advocate. And so this survey was administered on a voluntary basis to folks who were waiting to speak to an advocate there. And there were over 3,000 people who responded. And some of the things that that survey learned is that over 1 in 3 participants said they had not asked someone for help for fear the person would be legally required to report what they shared. When people were asked about the impact of reporting on their lives, so people who had had a report made about them or their lives or experiences, 50% of people said that the report made their situation much worse. 12% said a little worse, 20% said no different, 15% a little better, and only 3% of people said that the report made their situation much better. So 62% of folks who were asked said that not only was the report not helpful, but it was actively harmful. It had made their situation worse. So this piece of information was part of where our name mandatory reporting is not neutral comes from. Because what I have seen over and over again in talking about this issue is that many, many people who are mandatory reporters have this perspective that, it's no big deal. It's not harmful, whatever, it's fine. Like, when in doubt, make a report and we'll let the state figure it out. We'll let Child Protective Services out. We better be safe than sorry. And one of the things that doesn't take into account is the harm of family policing, the idea that we have this false idea that mandatory reporting leads to more resource. And what mandatory reporting does is it leads to an investigation by the state. And sometimes that investigation may come with some kind of resource for folks, but its primary goal isn't resource. Its primary goal of a report is an investigation. And so this is part, and Laura actually also made these beautiful graphics. So mandatory reporting is not neutral and mandatory reporting is not support. So those are some of the key pieces that we have learned when we're talking with folks about this issue. And so given the landscape of all of that, given that, I know it can be a little distracting, excuse me, part of what brought me to this work is that I worked 10 years supporting young people who had experienced violence and inside an anti-violence organization. And what I saw over and over and over again was that the way that the various systems and particularly sort of nonprofit service organizations were set up, young people who were experiencing domestic and sexual violence were falling through the cracks of the supports we had. So we had anti-violence programs who were not set up with young people in mind. And for the few programs that had youth kind of services or youth supports, those were usually prevention kind of supports where they would go into schools or organizations and talk to young people about how to prevent violence. Or you might be a young person who could talk to an adult advocate. I worked with a young person who I could not get connected to a mainstream program. I did all the back end calling. I did, I had commitments from that program to support that young person. And part of it was that she had a person, this young person was a person who was really used to accessing youth-based supports. So she could go drop in somewhere. She, could reach out at a time that worked for her. She didn't have a reliable cell phone. And those organizations only worked by being able to call you back. And so she was never going to be able to get connected to a support that could only call her back. And so what I saw over and over again is that anti-violence programming just wasn't designed with young people in mind. And then we had youth-based programming who often did really good job of figuring out how to stay connected with young people about these questions of supporting youth self-determination, but they almost never had any kind of training or support to be thinking about violence, to be thinking about and recognizing domestic and sexual violence and knowing how to be good support folks. So when young people were experiencing violence, they were falling through the cracks of all the formal kinds of organizations we had, because mainstream anti-violence programs weren't doing a good job supporting them, and youth programs weren't doing a good job of seeing the violence they were experiencing. So Laura's gonna talk a little bit more in a moment about some of the art and the visualization process. The process of how this came, Laura, Sean, and I met a lot, came up with ideas. We used things we knew about this issue and about our various work and showing up and supporting young people. And then Laura went and did her magic and made beautiful visuals and made us a base version. And then the folks at Goodfoot Arts Collective were generous enough to make time for us to come and share the zine with young people there and get their feedback. And so just to say a couple things about Goodfoot Art Collective, they're started and co-founded by someone who had worked in anti-violence work supporting young people, who's also an amazing dancer and amazing artist. And she founded this organization that is primarily doing arts and dance-based work with young people, largely young people of color in South Seattle and South King County, where most of us in the Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral project are located. And then they're also using that time and space to skill build, to community build, to really thinking about, you know, how young people are supported in a larger way. So we shared the zine with young people. Sean and I went, we brought food, we paid them money, and they helped us make the zine better. They helped us understand, does this work? Does this not work? These are some of the pieces of feedback they gave in which we made adjustments to the zine. So I want to lift up the brilliance and expertise. We collected different kinds of ways of learning. My favorite, it's bolded, I dislike mandatory reporting because about half of the people who, like the sheets they had people pass in, when we said, what do you like, what do you not like? Most of them said, I dislike mandatory reporting. I also want to say the title that group of young people came up with. So this was titled by those young people, and they gave us art direction. My personal favorite piece of feedback is down there in the corner that Laura also highlighted, which is, we had opportunities where they were doing art. So they were doing reflection and art. And during that time, I played music, which I thought I did an okay job. And then I got the feedback, and one of the pieces of feedback was, I didn't like the music. It was all in caps. I didn't like the music, but I appreciate the effort. The playlist thing is a good idea. So that is my favorite piece of lovely feedback from the young folks. So I just want to say, if you want to financially support Goodfoot Arts Collective, if you want to lift up their work, if you want to lift up their art, if you are in the Seattle area, they're doing constantly things you can support. So I just cannot say more gratitude for how Goodfoot Arts showed up and supported us. They were so brilliant. And so my deepest gratitude to the young people there and everyone at Goodfoot for their support. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Laura.
Thank you, Shannon. Yes, working with young people is the best. And I'm sad I wasn't there to meet them. So my name is Laura. I am the person behind Radical Roadmaps, which I've been lucky enough to do all the graphic notes for the Build Your Abolitionist Toolbox sessions, as well as many other things for interrupting criminalization and other folks. And I wanted to talk about how I approach visualizing information for the zine, but also just how I approach this work in general. Also just as an invitation for folks on this call to try to practice to see if that would be something that you can add to your kind of toolkit for your work. So if we could go to the next slide. So this is probably an overused quote by now, especially by movement artists and cultural workers, but it's one that I definitely hold in my heart when I'm doing this work and kind of grounds me. So as a cultural worker who belongs to an oppressed people, my job is to make revolution irresistible. And that's by Toni Cade Bambara, who was a writer, was all the amazing, but definitely check Toni out if you haven't read her work. But that part about our job of making the revolution irresistible has been something that has grounded me, especially in the last 3 years, of how can I I guess somehow I'm really good at doodling and listening and like bringing it together. So like, how can I use that to bring people in and get people excited about the things that I'm also excited about, the things that I see other folks are doing in the world, this like other vision that folks have. And so that has always been a thing that I've used to guide my work. The next slide. And so this started as graphic recording, so both for abolitionist, this toolbox series, as well as other things. But I've always seen graphic recording, and I'm sure many of you have seen visual note taking or versions of that on the internet, if not of mine. There are so many amazing practitioners out there. And how I see it is really an invitation to the audience to interact with the work in a way to either like an invitation to dive deeper into something that they maybe haven't like known about or didn't quite understand, an invitation to maybe if they were a part of a conversation that someone did visual notes for, to like to remember to go back as a way to build on a conversation. I never see them as fully their own thing. Graphic notes or visual notes are always a part of a larger conversation. And I always hoped that they would be this launching point for someone versus like the beginning and end of how they're engaging on a certain topic. They're so they're an invitation for that, and they also wouldn't exist without the people who are having the conversation, right? I can't draw all those things by myself. They are very much dependent on like the brilliance of other people. So for example, another practice that I have is sometimes I'll get emails asking if I can like sell a print of something, or someone can get permission of graphic notes that I've taken. And I always ask the person to go to the organization that those notes were taken with and ask them, because for me, like that, it was a collective process and their brilliance made the art, even if I was the one drawing it. And so when thinking about the zine, if we could go to the next one, especially in thinking of, well, I love zines. I come from like, I was a baby punk in Philadelphia. I was there. I lived it. So I love zines as a medium. And I also worked with young people when I was in Philly and made zines with them. And I wanted the zine to feel really approachable. I wanted it to be really inviting, but not just like to read and maybe to break down complex ideas, which is always something that I'm thinking about when I'm doing my work, but also approachable in a way of like, please, like, draw on me. Like this zine is also for you. So a part of that was this kind of welcome letter that I believe Shannon wrote. This version is a little weird. It's fixed now in the zine. I just wanted to name that out loud. I noticed that it's not aligned. But what I was doing with the letter was one, having these kind of bubble letters that begin and end the letter that feel a little just more inviting, like saying hello, like just being like, hi, versus like, dear reader, right? Like it's a little less serious, a little more chill. And then also having these kind of annotations or doodles that someone might do around the edges of a text, whether that's like a book that they're reading or something else. So having those underlines, I don't know if kids still do it, but the S doodle is in there. That's from me personally. I did those a lot. But really like, how would young people kind of, what are signals for them that like, this is really something that they can go into? And so for the next slide, as I think about zines, especially, I really, just as I saw graphic notes as co-creating something with really brilliant people, having really amazing conversations. I also wanted the zines that I was a part of making to be a co-creation. So you'll see, it felt really important to me that there were these kind of workbook style activities. Now it's your turn, and there's just like a blank page for someone to draw, but it's not fully blank because we know that a blank page can be really intimidating. So there's still something that guides them, still a little bit of a flair. And even in pages that are instructions like mapping or support solar system, I wanted that to also be a coloring page. So even in pages like that, I hope that young people, or really whoever is engaging in this zine, is actually drawing in it and writing and coloring and putting notes. Because this, like, they're needed in this work too, right? Like their contribution is needed, and their expertise is really important. And I know that as a person who's worked with young people, and I want the physical thing to also kind of mirror that. And so that was the main way in which we were approaching the visuals. And I think that's all I had to say about that. Yeah, it's passing it to Sean.
Hello. Hello, my name is Sean. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a part of the Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral core group, and have also done some work with Shannon and others around abolishing the family policing system. I am super happy to be here with you all, rolling this zine out and talking about this zine. So I am going to be talking about art as a tool for growth and possibilities of the zine in the world. And I wanted to share that really, I feel like it really started with including a quote from Audre Lorde's essay, "Poetry is not a luxury." And I wanted to read this quote. I find it really powerful, and it's also in the zine. And Audre Lorde writes, "This is poetry as illumination, for it is through poetry that we give name to those ideas which are, until the poem, nameless and formless, about to be birthed, but already felt." And I find this quote so incredibly powerful. And I feel like it carries all the themes that permeate through this zine, and all the activities that are in it. And really, I feel like this quote, at least for me, kicked off how we would include art as a way for young people to tap into understanding what is mandatory reporting and what do they need to be safe and whole, who can help them do that, and that therefore leading to possibilities for change for them and for us. And so where we included art and poetry and music in the zine, in the next slide, we used, there's one page that explains why we would be talking about or using art when we're talking about mandatory reporting, with the quote from Audre Lorde that I just read, Franny Choi's poem, and a related activity. There are many, we offered many reflection questions to respond through drawing or writing. And even the grounding that Laura walked us through at the beginning, I feel like is also a way for us to think about grounding as a means to tap into self and our creativity. And then we have a Spotify playlist, because who doesn't love music, with different songs of resistance and acknowledgement and support and so on. So I really feel like the zine is really about learning about how mandatory reporting and engaging in its understanding through young people's own life, through art and creativity, to birth something new. So new possibilities to counter the harm that they're experiencing for themselves and for their communities. And really, in that essay that Audre Lorde wrote, that we use the quote from, really, she's talking about using art in the name of illumination, which I feel like in this sense is about giving birth and form to something that doesn't yet exist in the world. It's really breaking the boundaries of what is and what could be when we're talking about countering harm. And so the moment that we pull out what's sitting inside of our lives as we grow to understand how mandatory reporting is impacting us or young people, and the ways that we want to be held and supported in that space, when those things come together and we can create something through art, we are really doing art in the name of illumination. And so mandatory reporting is a reality. And if we want that reality to change, the first thing that we really have to do is dream and create and put out different things in the world. And I feel like the zine is an entry point into being able to do that. As many people are doing a lot of work to change laws, which can be long and difficult tasks and needed for us, young people engaging in this can immediately act towards putting their own creativity in the world around mandatory reporting, around what they want to see that's different, around how they want to be cared for. So specifically, when we're talking about dreaming of a different world, we are both revealing what we want to see change, so what we don't like about it, and that which we actively want to see, so what we want to experience in the future. And so in the context of mandatory reporting specifically, and our society structures in general, when we create art that imagines a world without these laws, we are imagining a world that doesn't yet exist. And that's kind of what makes me so excited about this zine. And that really allows like our creativity for how we can care for ourselves and each other, specifically for young people engaging in this scene, is really the possibility that we can realize together. And I just, I think for myself, I kind of can be hard on myself and be like, oh, I'm not really creative, I'm not really artistic. And I feel like this zine offers like so many different ways that young people and others can engage differently, creatively. It doesn't have to be all of those things. It can be one or two of those things that really resonates with people. And also, we don't need to be distracted from our imagination. We can really consider it outside of the confines of our social structures. And so the zine is centered for young people, and it is for all of us. And I think because young people are experiencing harm in different ways, they're processing it different, the way that they want to be held and the things that they want to change are really different. And that allows the possibilities of how to use this zine, they become endless. And so, please share this with young people that you know, that you support, that you love. And I just want to end that, when the webinar was coming out, I had several of my friends reach out to me that are in like helping professions. So teaching, advocacy, social work, therapy, those working with young people, really wanting to engage with the zine and learn more about mandatory reporting, think about alternative ways to care for each other outside of our laws and systemic structures. And that's what I'm most excited for what the zine can do in the world. So thank you.
I'll invite folks back from the break. Welcome back. I'll re-put into the chat if folks want to continue to share, to let folks know who you are and some information about you. I'm gonna just read a couple of the words that folks are sharing about, one word that comes to them when they think of mandatory reporting. Counterintuitive, targeted, unsettling, traumatic, adultism, anxiety, sneaky or insidious, classism, state, stressful, distrust, corrupt, surveillance, coercive. Yeah, thank you so much for introducing yourselves and for sharing those words. A thing, I guess it shouldn't surprise me, but I am regularly reminded of, and it sits heavy with me every time I have this experience, is of everyone I talk to about mandatory reporting, young people are often some of the most informed and most knowledgeable about it. A lot of adults and different workers that I talk to tend to, there's this mass confusion or this mass fog. I think many people sit in tension with their requirement as mandated reporters and their own values. And anything that has that frozen, stuck energy, it's really hard to kind of get a hold of it, right? To like get above it, get around it, to kind of see it when we are stuck inside of it. And so some of this work is to just try to loosen up and to try to get right-sized about the reality of mandatory reporting. Because what I have learned over and over again is that people's ideas about mandatory reporting and family policing are very far away from the reality of mandatory reporting. Every time I say to folks, hey, this is not working. It is actively harmful. People are telling us over and over again. There is this, I think panic might be an appropriate word. There was a panic from many adults and from many people, workers and others that I'm talking to saying, you know, we need it. We need it. Kids are being hurt. And without mandatory reporting, kids will be hurt. And what I come back to all the time is young people are being hurt all the time. Mandatory reporting is not stopping it. And people are telling us it is harming them, that it's actually cutting them off from support, not connecting them. And I think it's so important to use all the tools at in our disposal. So our engagement, our organizing, but also our art and our creativity to help tell the story right-sized about what people's actual experiences are. And so where I am talking to adults who are like, I don't know, I guess I'm a mandatory reporter, not really sure what that means. I will talk to young people and they will regularly be able to tell me exactly what the mandatory reporting requirements are. They'll tell, as happened in this workshop actually, regularly will tell us about experiences of family policing, about times when reports were made about their lives and experiences. And so I'm really grateful, and I feel like Sean and Laura shared so beautifully the hopefulness of getting to build something creative to try to help us get some movement and some space around this issue that is really stuck for so many folks. So I'm going to share just a little bit about how we could imagine this tool being used. So this is just another page in the zine, which I'll read out loud for us. Mandatory reporting is a systemic structure, but it is also a social structure. If we are going to create a world beyond the confines of society's current structures, both legal and otherwise, we must first envision it. Art can be a way of taking an idea trapped inside our minds and making the first step towards bringing it into existence. An idea unencumbered by what is and birthed into the physical world is the beginning of making that dream something that can be believed. So one of the activities that I've had the opportunity to do for a long time, I think I'm into almost year 20 of versions of this activity that we were able to share in the zine, and we highly encourage everybody to use, is mapping your support solar system. So I've done this in various iterations with folks, and I am gonna, I won't sit with us while everyone makes their own map, but I will take you through the instructions, and I invite you to create your own map. So mapping your support solar system, the vision behind this activity is to help people understand what their support networks currently look like. I sometimes think about it as the sister or the cousin to pod mapping. You know, like many things in the world, I think they were co-created at separate times. This activity has been around for a long time, and it is in conversation with pod mapping that I'm sure many folks are familiar with. And the way that I think about sort of the distinctness of the support solar system is that instead of the maybe visioning of, you know, who are your support people that pod mapping invites us to do, you know, who are you going to call if something hard happens? What the solar system does is, who are your people, working or not working, good or bad, in struggle, in deep connection? Because understanding what is the nature of your various relationships can help you both lean into the ones that are supportive and make plans for the ones that aren't. And so this activity, if you want to do it together, you can get out a sheet of paper, maybe the flip side of the paper that you did our grounding activity, and you start by making a circle. And in that circle, you can call that circle me, you can write your initials, you could draw a doodle, you can do anything that represents you. And that is the circle in the middle. And then you're going to plot a few of your primary relationships. So again, this doesn't just have to be your closest, most trusted people. It's like, who do you run into in your life and in your days? That is likely to be your friends, family of any definition, teachers, neighbors, coaches, whoever are your people. And then once you've had an opportunity to plot who your people are, you're going to make lines connecting you with those people. And this is one of the opportunities for creativity. So those lines can look like all sorts of things. We really encourage folks to be creative in how they draw their lines. So that might be, you know, I use all the time, like, you know, one of my besties. I might write a really, really thick line because, like, you know, she's ride or die. We're there for each other. Or I might talk about, you know, a member of my family who's there, but, like, you know, we talk once a month. And so maybe that's a dotted line. Like, that person's there, but we're not like in the deepest everyday connection. But feel free to use whatever creative way represents your connection with that person. And then the final part of this activity is we're gonna weight the relationship, and weight it in the sense of just information. So this doesn't have to be, you know, necessarily like good or bad. It's more like, how is it working for you? How is it connective? How is it challenging? And so using symbols, it can be as simple as plus or minus signs. It could be hearts. It could be whatever for you helps you weight that. So there's a beautiful example here. So with this person, Jay, you can see that Jay has like a really thick solid line with their aunt. You can see that there's a dotted line to Jay's mom with a lightning strike. And, you know, we don't know what that means for Jay, but whatever that means for Jay around that connection. And so the goal of this activity is to just see, it's a snapshot of who are your people. One of the things that happens sometimes when I do this activity with people is it very regularly brings up sadness for people. And what I have learned over the years is that many of us have a gap between what we want our connections to be like, who we want our people, and how well they show up for us, and what is actually true. And sometimes when people take the time to map it out, there's grief because they'll say, like, it'll make them think about someone who's not in their life anymore or a challenging connection. And I always just want to make space for the grief and make space for the gap between what we want to be true and what is currently true. And this is information, right? It's information that tells us who are those people, how connected do we feel. And my hope is that this is a tool, right? It's a tool to understand, maybe there's only a couple of connections because it's hard to think about who your people are. Maybe it actually feels abundant and maybe to the point of overwhelm. So some questions to guide folks are really thinking about, are there connections that are not working or that you would like to make some change in? And what are the things that would help you, get those connections more in alignment with how you vision your connection to be? So that is just one example of how the art in this, of how the activities in this zine can work. So, as we have done this with young people, there's space to draw. There's, it's a workshop and a zine. You can go through, there's space there to draw in the zine and this activity. And our hope really is that folks think of other creative ways that we haven't even thought of about how to use the zine, about what might be possible. I want to highlight a couple more things that I feel really excited about. So maybe the full-on zine is not for you. It's too overwhelming. It's too many pages. You don't want to print it out. Laura so generously pulled out a couple of the pages as standalone coloring pages. So you'll see this here, and they're both linked separately on the Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral zine page. And so these are coloring books, and so or coloring pages. And so this image here, Laura helped create for the Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral project to really help us think about, this many tentacled like sea monster that is mandatory reporting, that it has sort of all of these pieces of surveillance and policing and silencing and criminalization that collectively sort of pull down the ship. So it's trying to help people think about the the tentacles of the beast is kind of the analogy we have sometimes used to try to understand what is this thing of mandatory reporting? How does it work? Why is it so insidious and impactful? And so the words here read, imagine mandated reporting as a giant squid that attacks communities or ships. Who do you imagine on the ship and what strategies or tentacles are impacting them? So that is a standalone coloring page that folks can just use independently. And the other is the quote that Sean shared earlier that Laura has so beautifully made into a standalone coloring page as well. So I can read it again. Sean read the quote previously, but this is poetry as illumination. For it is through poetry that we give name to those ideas which are, until the poem, nameless and formless, about to be birthed, but already felt. So I'm going to pause there. I want to invite folks, if you have questions about this work, about the zine, and we wanted to make some space for folks to share questions you might have. Great. Raina.
Thank you so much. I'm trying to figure out how to lower my hand. Thank you so much. I was hoping to ask over voice because, I want to make sure that I word this well. So thank you for this space. It's a thought that I'm having that I'm not sure how to work through. Obviously, being a mandated reporter, I mentioned that I'm in Philadelphia. Um, I'm wondering, like, since you mostly work with young people on something like a solar system and working on relationships that maybe are not as positive and sometimes being, your caregivers. I'm just curious, how do you, and I don't know if you're going to talk about this later, and I'm happy to be open if you're going to talk about this later, um, you know, being the creative people that you are, how you engage parents in this kind of work so that the burden is not totally on young people, who are very vulnerable. That was my question. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much.
Talk to you again. Do not let me talk to you again.
Mute that person, but I'll make a time for questions in a minute. Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And we have a couple of different projects that we're working on that question, but I did want to invite, I know I've heard Sean say really beautiful things about this question. I can see Sean may or may not be interested in that, but I would love if you might be willing to share a little bit some of your thinking about how, as a parent and also in your work with parents, how do we engage on this question of mandatory reporting?
Yes. Raina, I think I'm saying your name correctly, hopefully. Thanks for asking this question. I think this is a really important question, because you're right, it shouldn't all fall on the burden of young people. And still, young people are impacted by it. So definitely they need to know and they need to understand and decide for themselves how they want to move in those spaces and how they want to be cared for and what's important for them. As a parent myself, it's really important for me as a parent to also understand how the family policing system works, especially as a Black mother myself. It's just important for me to know what I can and can't do, how I have to like traverse. And so I think we have to help parents understand how the system works. A lot of times they're really clear about how it works because they're quite impacted by it and they know how to, they know what it kind of, how it exists and how it impacts them. And I think we need more, which is why I'm so excited about this zine, is we need more opportunities for parents to engage in this kind of work and to name what it is that they need and to name how they want to move through mandatory reporting, how to help abolish mandatory reporting. I have talked with many parents who have, as a result of mandatory reporting, been separated from their children, have been impacted by it. It has not supported or helped them. And so to me, those people that are really impacted should be a part of being able to create and make something new. And so we have to engage parents in these conversations and get them to share what it is that they need and what it is that they want. So that's what's coming to mind. I don't know, Shannon, if you want to add anything else to that.
Yeah, that was so beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. One of the things we hear all the time from parents is this disappointment and this heaviness about a report was made, particularly at school, and nobody talked to me. Nobody got curious. Nobody called me first. And I think that is one of the things that policing and criminalization does, right? So whenever we have these systems that are based on policing people, that are based on questions of liability, because there's many reasons I think the levels of unsubstantiated reports are so high. So people make more reports than the system actually even responds to in the first place. And part of that is because a lot of reporting is driven by liability-based frameworks. So people make reports because they don't want to get in trouble or they don't want to experience a consequence. And sometimes people are very clear about the consequence of not reporting. And sometimes it's just an experience, like it's just a feeling that something bad will happen, and it's not actually clear to people, you know, the evaluation of how likely it is that you're going to experience that consequence if you don't report is just not available to people. And so what that means is tons of reports are being made all the time above and beyond meaningful concerns about harm that's happening to young people. And I think many parents feel very confused about having just sort of these like this massive amount of over reporting just above and beyond harm that is happening to folks. And so, yeah, I think we have a lot of things on our wish list for the Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral project, but an arm that is about supporting and organizing parents and radical parent organizing around, hey, as parents, this system is not working for us. We need care, we need support that isn't about policing. That is part of our vision. Laura or Shauna, is there anything else either of you wanted to say about that question? I'm just catching up on the chat. Are there other questions that folks have either in the chat or that you would like to speak out loud? Well, while folks are thinking, I'll give you an opportunity to think about your questions and put them in the chat. I just wanted to share a couple of more things about the strategies of Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral project in our larger attempt to reduce the harm of mandatory reporting, abolish mandatory reporting, and family policing. So one of our ideas, our theories, our practices really is about bringing into the light what is really happening. What are particularly families of color experiencing as a result of these systems, and helping to make more visible the actual reality of these systems. Because people's experiences matter, the stories that of people's realities matter. And a lot of that gets really buried. And so we do workshops. We next year will have available for folks a digital storytelling project that we're working on. So it's not ready for the light of day yet, but we are in process of gathering and collecting stories about the impacts of these systems because we believe that story matters. It's another project for another day, but we continue to be in complex relationship with what is our legislative strategy? Is there what is the value of our relationship to the state? Because mandatory reporting, there is federal legislation that mandates that each state has a set of requirements, but a lot of the nitty gritty is built on the state by state level, and what mandatory reporting laws and policies look like vary greatly state by state. And so in many ways, you need a complex state by state strategy to meaningfully reduce the harm of mandatory reporting, to abolish it, to change the laws that enforce mandatory reporting. In many states, there is a criminal consequence, at least on the books, for not reporting that is enforced in a variety of ways. And we continue to be in complex relationship about how we want to be in relationship to that, because we know the most radical work is not happening as a legislative effort. And we know that if people were not criminalized for not reporting, if people had spaciousness to not be required to report when they believe it was harmful, that would be better. That would be less harmful than the thing that's currently true.
Hey, Shannon,
So yeah.
there are a few things in in the chat. I just want to read to you. I know you're almost out of time, but I wanted to just pull up that Cal has a question here or thought. I would be very interested in learning more about sharing the zine. If it would be possible to put up on our website, as someone else had mentioned, recreate the content.
Yeah, we invite people to share and repost the zine. We ask always that folks credit the work of the folks who helped to put it together, but we would like it to be shared. So if you'd like to repost, if you'd like to have it on your website, if you'd like to particularly make sure it's accessible to young people, please print it, please repost it. Just, of course, credit the work of folks and that went into it.
Perfect. Thank you. How can we train mandated reporters to be more careful on not reporting when it's not necessary? And I see
Yeah.
thing in the chat that posted your webinar on the topic.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that, Laura. So yeah, we do have trainings that talk about that in more detail. And I think that is some of the strategy we are more developed on at Mandatory Reporting is Not Neutral, is how to support mandated reporters at the very least to not over-report. And it seems like a very low ask. It's kind of the floor, and we're pretty far away from it. Most folks are over-reporting. And so we do have strategies, including trainings that we come and do for organizations. So if folks are interested, please reach out to us. There's lots of contact information on our website.
I also see in the chat, JMAC for Families has a training on mandated supporting. I love that. That explores support and connection before having to call. And I'm going to just put in the chat a link to JMAC for Families. They do great work. So I saw that there. I'm also seeing another question here. Grace says, I honestly feel like there is no true support or solutions to actually get to the heart of the problem, to helping support parents through their own traumas and overcoming the challenges. It's always, here's a training, or you're a bad parent, you're angry, etc.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, Grace, I just want to say yes to that.
Yeah, I think that's right. Wondering if y'all can speak to navigating calculated risks in terms of maybe not reporting despite a mandated reporter. Yeah, that's hard. That's Kimberly basically asking the question that is a real wrench. You know, if you're a social worker and you're mandated to report and you don't report and somebody finds out and they try to yank your license, then what? I think is a concern or fear that people have. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So to that question, which we get a lot, I don't speak publicly about our answer to that question, but we do invite folks to reach out to talk about strategizing in a more one-on-one or smaller environments to really think through things like risk assessments for not reporting. So we're happy to be in conversation with folks. Also, if folks are interested, one of our strategies we are building in the future is really looking at mapping not only, so we have mapped the legal reality of mandatory reporting, but where the rubber meets the road is often how organizations and different kinds of professionals with different credentials and licensing and how they are required to make reports. And so if you're a social worker, if you're a medical provider, if you're a mental health provider, and you're interested in helping us map what your licensing credentials says about mandatory reporting, that is a project we're working on in 2024 to help think through these exact questions around strategies for different kinds of workers and how mandatory reporting shows up in your work. So please reach out to us. We'd love to work with you on that.
I would also just add in the point that, you know, we're fighting for bigger things, even than the technical interventions that people are sharing about. I think some of the questions are speaking to this, that, you know, we are living in a society where people don't have what they need to thrive, to live. People, you know, they're cutting people off of Medicaid in huge numbers. Folks are losing their jobs. People don't have health care. Families can't afford childcare. And childcare should be taken out of the capitalist model altogether because there's no money to be made in childcare, right? Like there's just no money to be made because frankly, the people who are offering the childcare are woefully underpaid. And the parents and the families have to pay exorbitant amounts of money to take care of their children. Lots of stressors that have nothing to do with individuals, that have everything to do with structures and systems. And I know this is something that, you know, that Shannon has spoken to and brought up for years, but like, ultimately we have to fucking change the whole entire society. I'm sorry to say, that's how we're going to get to safety, you know, is people have to really get at the root, as somebody mentioned before, as to what's going on here. A lot of this other stuff we're doing is literally band-aid stuff in the meantime, in order to be able to try to get over to the bigger fight that we need to be fighting. I know that's 8:01. I don't want to take up more of your time, but I had to jump in there on that point because I'm seeing a lot of stuff in the chat that I absolutely agree with. And, you know, in the meantime, we have to do other work, but ultimately this shit has to change from the root. So anyway, I'm going to throw back to Shannon to close us off.
Amazing. That is a perfect, beautiful way. Amazing. So there's lots of, we've dropped the link in the chat a million different places. And so please reach out to us for training support, for organizing collaborations. And please use the zine. Share it, reshare it, print it out and leave it all the places that young people are that you're supporting. Can be a helper to young people by getting the zine to them in their hands, by using your copier at your organization to make some copies and leave them around. And so just thank you. Thank you to Project Nia, to Mariam, to Just Beginnings Collaborative, to the Goodfoot Arts Collective, to our captioner and our interpreters, to our project team. It's been such a joy to work with Laura and with Sean on this project. And I appreciate everyone getting to learn about this work together. Thank you.